Welcome to today's lecture, which is going to look at funding schools from a policy perspective. My belief in this particular chapter is this is going to be one of the more difficult chapters in the textbook. I would say refer to the charts and graphs, look at my PowerPoint, watch the video. A lot of this stuff is basic stuff that you will not have to practice, but it's basic stuff that you have to know. When you're preparing for the quiz, look at my PowerPoint, watch the video, and that material is what I will hold accountable on the midterm final and for the quizzes. So keep that in mind. This will come directly from the PowerPoint from this chapter. I think this is important stuff. So we're going to talk about, what educational finance looks like in America, how are education and economics related, how schools govern in America, where the money comes from, what's called adequate and equitable in schools, and that's a challenge. And can schools serve economics, equality, productivity, and liberty all in one setting? So this chapter begins where the last one ends, basically by saying our society doesn't like schools. Linkages between student achievement and school funding is mixed, and we can't measure what the results are because education costs different within different organizations. And I agree with this. So this creates a challenge as to who should we give more money to and who should we not give money to. Experiences that I've had that some of you might have had in yours. I managed a branch campus for early childhood education where we basically, through another university, I spent 2 years placing student teachers in different rural and urban school settings. I would go to some of these rural schools that didn't have any resources because they weren't getting state funding, and then I would go to urban schools that had the newest computers, newest technology, newest everything, and they were receiving state funding, but they were receiving state funding at a cost. They had to implement state programs, federal programs, that the rural schools had more autonomy to do what they chose to do. So the question is, how do you measure that? How do you measure the success? And how do you justify where you spend the money? So that's a big deal, and it's an important consideration here. So we have a problem, and we don't have a specific linkage to funding. So local districts basically decide how they want to spend their money. If you become a superintendent, you're going to have a lot to say over how the money's spent. You're going to have guidelines to follow at the federal level and the state level in working with your school boards, but guess what? You're going to have a control on the money that you spend. So each district might want something different. So if you're a principal in a district that highly values electives or extracurriculars, that's where the money's going to go to, and you're going to be presiding over that and managing that. If you're a principal in a building that goes on a traditional school back to basics movement, you're going to be more curricular focused and more curricularly spending your finances. This is different from school to school, organization to organization, but it's like I talked about in the last chapter. This is one of the problems and challenges we have with local control. So you have to keep that in mind. So there are not published or designed presentations for the text. So I'll tell you if there are some of the diagrams, and I'll talk about them a little bit, and I'll tell you what page you can find them on. So figure 2.1 in the textbook is on page 22, and it shows that the 3 largest federal expenditures are Social Security Administration, Health and Human Services, and Department of our Defense. 61% of our tax dollars as of 2010, and remember this, all of the numbers that you're going to see in any projections of finance are going to happen at the year 2000, 2010, 2020, 2030, and they're going to go on previous decade census data. So even though it's not 2010 anymore, we're using that information. We're going to continue to use that information for some years. I want to note that only 3% goes to education. So only 3% of the money that's a federal expenditure goes to education. It's going elsewhere. So each one of us, we can eliminate the national debt. You, me, all of us together. We can just pay the federal government $44,000. If everybody in the United States did that, there would be no more national debt. Obviously, that's not going to happen, but what you do need to know is that that number is increasing, not decreasing. So there's less revenue, and there's less money available for schools. So that's why we don't have money.
So
when we're looking at where the money is going, this has changed as well. Schools didn't get much money, but between 1920 and 1950, and for some of you, ask your parents, ask your grandparents, teachers were starting to get paid more. Money was given to schools for equipment, supplies. There was a massive growth in it, and it was post-Great Depression and post-World War II. Education became a high priority in the United States in the early 1900s. Then it switched to math and sciences in 1950 to 1970s. I teach an organizational theory class, and we're really going to look at the effect that the launching of Sputnik had on global competition. It's the truth, though. Like, when the Russians started exploring the space program, we switched all of our emphasis to math and science. I want to note that because it's ironic, because we diversified where our money went to, but the Russian population did not diversify their money, and that's what caused really the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1980s. Where does our money go to now? Well, honestly, it goes to Title I, ELL, special education, and policymakers working towards standardized testing. One of the challenges that you'll see with some of the people that are creating standardized testing is the schools of thought that they come from. The people making and designing standardized tests normally come out of social sciences like psychology and sociology. They're not coming out of an education background. So that creates a challenge as well. So they might have a different opinion on what you and I think a standardized test should look like. So education and economics are related. Economists have said that education makes a positive contribution and it lets us be globally competitive. We've tried to quantify the value of schooling. It's near impossible to do. Different studies have been done that look at different aspects of it, but to quantify the value of schooling is almost impossible. Economics tries to balance and manage what school funding is and where it should come from. And if you read any advanced articles from a business school that are looking at the cost of education, you're going to see that a lot of it is basically how much should we budget, how can we do forecasting to prepare for our schools. And I think this is all relevant and important information for all of you, and it's something that you should think about. So our textbook basically gives us, desires and resources is where, where economics is. Desires are infinite. Everybody wants everything, but resources aren't. So economics and society, you should know that some resources are going to be heavily available, some are going to be not as much available. So that creates a challenge as to how you fund and how you spend money. For resources that are more scarce, they're going to cost more. For resources that are readily available, they're going to cost less. Look at the cost of oil and the cost of gas throughout the United States. Fluctuates all the time based on the amount of resources that are available. Education is a challenge because education is truly purchased with tax dollars. This is a big idea here, this line right here. Education must be purchased with tax dollars. And that's going to impact a lot, because that means that there are different stakeholders and different people who claim ownership over education. That creates a problem, and that creates a challenge. So, as an economic and social good, economics deals with goods and services and how commodities relate to individuals in society. So it relates to education. One of the most important relationships education produces is human capital, meaning that we're preparing people to be future leaders, and their education should reinvest in society and continue to draw and gain resources from society. So if individuals benefit from education, then it should help and improve society. In theory, great idea. Does it always work that way? Probably not. So human capital was first looked at by A Nation at Risk. A Nation at Risk is one of the landmark publications on education. Came out in 1983 under the Reagan administration, and it looked at how our schools were doing. Many people have interpreted this one way, looked at it another way, said A Nation at Risk was 100% right, some people said it was 100% wrong. All the, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, the most important things that you needed to get out of it were that human capital mattered, and you're investing in society, not individuals, and that you're producing people that could do skilled labor versus unskilled labor. So it did take a policy perspective, but it also took an economics perspective as well. So whether or not you agree or disagree with the report, those were probably the two big ideas on this, and it led us to think we need to design schools so the kids have success post-secondary. So that was kind of the point of A Nation to Risk and what we can take from it and look at it. So if we have universal access to education, then we should be able to create skilled labor and improve the labor market if we give access to all. So then that leads to a bigger question. Is education all equitable? Should education be equal for everybody? In theory, yes. But let me challenge your belief and challenge your thoughts on that. Some of you watching this and taking this class probably have children. Would you spend more money to give your children a better education? Would you move them to a school district that you know is performing higher results and higher college graduates and spend more money and have your property taxes increased? Some of you would say yes. Some of you would say no, I would prefer to improve the poor performing schools. Is there a right answer for this? No, but it's a matter of personal opinion. So we really can't create equitable schools because we're not doing it from that perspective. Globally, education, the World Bank gives basic education to low-income countries. Basic education, you'll see this if you take any international ed courses, basic education means through 8th grade. Everybody should have an 8th grade education, and that's available to low-income countries, and it increases the availability of education. So I think this is important. This is a big, 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 big idea here. People with less than a high school diploma have a 14% chance of being unemployed. Individuals with a bachelor's degree have a 4% chance of being unemployed. The struggle that we're dealing with right now is that less than high school really isn't existing anymore. Now it's basically high school diploma or bachelor's degree, and I bet in 15 to 20 years it's going to be bachelor's degree or master's degree. So then you have to figure, is the cost of education worth it? Are your tuition dollars worth it? Is it enough of a gain for you to advance in society? That's the question. And it's a decision that a lot of you are going to make for yourselves and for your children. So we'll look briefly at the exclusion principle because our textbook mentions it. Basically saying that high spending for schools is inefficient. We shouldn't spend money for schools because it's inefficient. Individuals are the ones that benefit from it. So high spending in a school that serves 2,000 students might only benefit 3 or 4 students. So is it worth it? Some of you are sitting there probably thinking, well, yes, if those 3 or 4 students can be productive members of society, then the spending is worth it. Others are sitting here probably thinking, you have to draw the line somewhere. That's the problem with school finance. So education competes against different ideas and different perspectives. Different people have different ideas as to whether or not education really is beneficial or not. So, socioeconomic investment. Research clearly shows increase in education reduces crime and reduces the need for welfare assistance. That is clear across education research, psychology research, and sociology research. Nobody can debate that. But the cost of schools is high, but the cost of prisons in the prison system is exponentially higher as well. So do you invest in education now to reduce crime and reduce the need for welfare, or do you not? So that's a challenge, and that's another debate that you have to have. So local and federal state funding for schools. Okay, so here's my opinion on this. This is broken down more into how, how finance is funded for districts, and not specifically for buildings. So when we're talking about local, federal, and state funding, you're going to want to refer to what's in the Principal's Guide for School Budgeting. Read it, scan it. If you're interested in this holistic view, that's great, but the other textbook looks more in terms of building level finance, and why I want you to look at that one for the definition of what local is, federal is, and what state is. So next chapter, we're going to be looking at state aid formulas, millage rates, and how we determine what fair and equitable funding is. If you need anything and there's anything I can do to help, let me know. And that'll be for chapter 3. Thank you.